Welcome to CMO Confidential, the podcast that takes you inside the drama, decisions, and choices that go with being the head of marketing. Hosted by five-time CMO Mike Linton.
Welcome, marketers, advertisers, and those who love them to Chief Marketing Officer Confidential. CMO Confidential is a program that takes you inside the drama, the decisions, and the politics that go with being the head of marketing at any company in what is one of the most scrutinized jobs in the executive suite. I'm Mike Linton, the former Chief Marketing Officer of Best Buy, eBay, Farmers Insurance, and Ancestry.com, here today with my guest, Tom Kirk, known universally as TK. TK is a very rare breed indeed. He's been at one agency for over 40 years. Yes, that's right, one agency for over 40 years. He started his career at Needham Harper, and when Needham Harper merged with BBDO and DDB to form Omnicom, easy for anybody to say, TK's agency left the merger to remain independent and formed RPA. He has been the chief client officer there for a number of years, and full disclosure, we worked together at Farmers. And to borrow from some of those commercials, TK knows a thing or two because he's seen a thing or two. Welcome, TK.
Thank you, Mr. Linton. It is great to see you. And yes, those are some fun days. I think we had a lot of fun together. We did some great work, and I'm very proud of all that. Very proud of that work.
Won a couple of Effies too, which was just icing on the cake.
Yeah.
So today's topic is the second on a theme that you've seen earlier, and we're talking about what your agency wants to tell you but won't. And so let's jump right in with a man who's seen almost all of it from his seat. The first question, TK, I'm assuming there's a whole lot of things agencies really want to tell their clients, but they won't. And obviously it's a theme of the show, but why is that? Why won't agencies talk to clients and tell them what's good for them?
Well, let me frame that a little bit this way, Mike, from the standpoint of the ability to have frank, open, and candid conversations both ways, agency to client and back, is really, in my mind, one of the hallmarks of a quality relationship. It's one of the distinguishing characteristics of a good relationship. But what does it take in order? And I believe, Mike, that we had that relationship. You and I had that relationship on farm. We could go to lunch or go into your office or whatever and have a pretty candid conversation. But what does it take?
And we knew the cone of silence was on all the time too.
Exactly. And so when I think about all of the client relationships I've had over my career, which has been a lot of clients, and I've had some great relationships, the unifying theme is when there's mutual trust and respect. When I trust you and I respect the job that you do. And I know that, to your point, the cone of silence, but I know that there's going to be no repercussion. When I come to you and say, Mike, I really feel like, we need to talk about this because the work will be better or the business will be better or whatever it is. But I know that that when I have that conversation with you, it's not going to damage our relationship, even if you don't agree with me. But at least we can have an open, candid conversation. And when you have that kind of trust in each other, and it's a two-way street, then it allows for candid conversations. And believe me, that is so necessary, because otherwise there's stuff going on, maybe within the agency or maybe within the client organization or maybe within the relationship itself. And if they don't get resolved or it's not aired, then there's no way to correct any problems.
Hey, so Tom or TK, tell me, what percent of clients that you've dealt with all your years would you say you had a really great relationship with?
Well, I will say this, and I've said this before to many people, I've been really blessed. I mean, I've had some great client relationships over my time, some that I look very fondly on. The percentage of great, and again, great is a high standard. Great would probably be 25%, 30.
That's a good number.
It is, when you consider the amount of clients that I have worked with, but I've been fortunate. I've had good clients, and we've been able to establish a good relationship with one another. And it really, honestly, goes to trust and respect.
So let's say you have 30% of the clients that are great. How do agencies think about clients? Because do they bucket them into types like great, good, not so good, hellacious, or whatever? How do you kind of lay out the client grouping? Because obviously all your clients aren't great, and some of them are super painful, probably. How do you think about them? Can you paint a landscape for our listeners about how the agency might see the client?
Well, I'm sure that agencies are different on this topic. With regards to our agency, we're independent, so we're able to make decisions that we believe are in our client's best interest and in the agency's best interest. And so, by not having to answer to shareholders and things like that, allows us to make hard decisions that sometimes aren't going to be necessarily financially rewarding for us. Meaning, we will turn down new business. So if a client has reached out to us to pitch their business, but we know that from a reputation standpoint, it's either a serial reviewer, and they just review every 3 or 4 years, or whatever, or we've just heard the stories are this is not a good client. They don't treat their people well. They don't treat the agency well. If there are things that we know going in are going to be problematic, then we'll pass on it. And even when there sometimes have been big clients, but there's been one, and I will not give any names on this to be inappropriate, but there's been one that was kind of a serial reviewer. And when the consultant called and said, hey, they want to talk to RPA, and I said, well, that's very flattering, but we're not interested. And the consultant was like, why? What are you talking about? I said, because advertising's not their problem. The reason they're in this serial review mode is they keep thinking advertising is going to solve the problem, and advertising is not their problem. The business is a little antiquated, and it's going to go away. So we'd rather not invest our time and energies in something where we can't be a helpful solution to what their problem is. But beyond that, we don't really bucket clients necessarily from a category standpoint. We do try to line up and match skill sets within different departments, different groups that might have something that's similar in that skill set, whether it's been a retail business or a fast food business or something. Then we try to line up similar skills for that. But
makes a lot of sense. Tell just so our listeners know. Just give us a 30 seconds on RPA and the independent agency model versus non-independent.
Well, we've been independent, as you said, from the beginning, when the merger with Omnicom happened. And we've always felt like, and we've always operated from the standpoint of, we believe that being independent allows us to only care about the client's business and our business.
And that means employee owned, right? Independent is employee owned in this case, right?
Correct. Yeah. So we can make decisions that we believe are in the best interest of our client without them having to be the best interest in our shareholders as a public company. So, we just think it's a better model, and we've survived very well under that. We're one of the largest independents in the country, and certainly I think the largest in Los Angeles. But it's a model that we're comfortable with and allows us to treat our people the way we think they should be treated.
Thank you for that. So one of the things that I've always thought, and I think you would agree with this, one of the most, obviously, you come to an agency and you want all of that the agency has to offer. But in a case of like RPA, creativity is going to be one of the most important, if not the only, the key reason you come to an agency. But then you look at the creative that comes out of the various client relationships. What are things that clients do that help the creative or don't help the creative?
Well, I think, to be honest, I think us being honest is good, right? That's what you want.
I thought that was our whole relationship, TK.
It is. It still is. I think what inhibits, first off, creativity should be considered a brand asset. Creative is a competitive advantage. What a great agency can do is bring to a client, creativity and advertising that breaks through, cuts through, connects to the customer, all that stuff. And it is a brand asset. And certainly if you have a campaign like, for example, the farmers campaign that builds over time and that has, kind of become iconic in the category, that's an asset. But what is it that inhibits creativity? Because anyway, I would say there has been a trend that has been developing for probably 25, 30 years. And there's, I think, a good reason for it, although it's not healthy. And that is the notion of consensus building. If you look at business is so competitive, and client organizations, some of your recent podcasts have been talking about the longevity of a CMO and the shelf life of a CMO. And you look at how competitive that job is. And so you can kind of understand why they want to make sure that everybody in the organization is on board with whatever you're going to be doing. Unfortunately, when you do that, you're going to dull the creative product. There's the famous story about, a committee was hired to design a horse. And so the committee went away and they all thought about it and they all provided their input and here's what we need. And everybody had a voice and they came back and what they had developed was a camel.
I agree with this. And I will say, my thing is democracy is really bad for brands and it's horrible for the creative because if you are letting everybody vote, those voters will sand off every edge.
Right.
Every edge of interesting part of creative. And you could see that, at least I think I can see that all over a ton of the advertising done today.
Yeah.
Where it is safe. It surely has a lot of voters and consumers aren't going to remember it at all.
And that's the problem. When you have created something that is, to your word, safe, which I agree with, it's only safe within the walls of the company. It's not safe in the marketplace. If you want to be successful in the marketplace, be brave. Have courage.
I agree with that. So you have these CMOs in seat. Gosh, I've been in, I guess, a number of them. And you do have all these people that want to vote. You do have the companies that the most passionate consumer of your marketing is usually inside your company. What advice would you give to CMOs on how to get the creative free? Like, you've watched a ton of this. There's best practice. There's less best practice. Tell us what you think.
When you say you said get the creative free.
So that you actually keep the edges on creative, because you see bad structure, bad voting, where every layer sees it brand new and then changes it, which rounds off every edge. What's some best practices to get the best creative out there?
Well, I've only had one client that's ever said this to me, but it was like remarkable. And he said, and he would say this frequently when we'd show him an ad or whatever, he'd say, well, I don't like it, but I'm paying you to develop this work. So, we're going to do it. We'll go forward with it. And if it doesn't work, then, you and I will have a conversation, but, I'm going to go forward with it. That was a while ago, and he had strength to do that. But if you want to get great creative, you've got to take the handcuffs off of your agency. You've got to trust that they have your best interest at heart. You think about it, an agency is the extension of a client's marketing department. Sometimes we have more people thinking about your business on a day in and day out basis than what the client organization has the ability to do on their end, because their department may not be that big, so we have people, that's all we're doing is thinking about your business from a standpoint of how do we connect to the customer. So, if you want to unleash it, give them more room, don't dull it with trying to come in with what the organization wants to hear.
So you give them room to be creative. What else do people give them? Because there's lots of business results, there's financials, there's all kinds of research, there's all kinds of input you make on the creative, there's testing you could do. Tell us any best practices there you would share with our listeners.
Well, yeah, and I do think that research is important. I think that you can, and I think you had one with was it Jeff Sieberts that talked about, Is measurement, killing marketing today?
Yeah.
And the answer to that is yes. But it doesn't mean the measurement is bad or that research is bad. We need it. We want that kind of information. We do a lot of research within the agency for our clients because we want that perspective and we need that. But at some point, you need to not put the hands of decision making in the hands of clients. In the hands of consumers. You take accountability, yourself and within your agency, who should be the experts at understanding what's going to communicate and what's going to break through.
I agree with this. My thing is research can only measure, it can't create. And a lot of times you have to let some creative stuff into the market to measure it. And if you try and measure it before it gets out, you will sand off all the creative edges and the consumer will tell you it sucks. And then you will lose the idea because you'll keep watering it down. I want to flip this over to marketing is the least consistently structured and least consistent set of expectations in the C-suite, at least in my opinion. So it has a lot of structures that probably interface with the agency. Tell us about structures within the client organization and any recommendations for how to get the best out of an agency within that marketing structure.
Well, I would say, Mike, that silos are great for storing grain. So if you need to store some grain, build a big silo. They're terrible at fostering collaboration, but a lot of client organizations are siloed. And, sometimes departments that should be talking to one another frequently don't even like each other. I'm always shocked at how in a lot of organizations, marketing and sales don't get along. They're kind of at odds with one another. But if you want to foster collaboration, open it up, create access, allow your agency to build relationships across your organization. You might be surprised that distribution might have an idea for something that they think is a competitive advantage that the agency gets turned on by.
I want to push on this a little bit because you're talking about collaboration and access with a really broad aperture. You're not talking about it just within the marketing department. You're saying let the agency feel and understand the whole company, go wherever it wants. You're not saying let the whole company, putting words in your mouth. You're not saying let the whole company vote on the advertising. But you're saying let the company input to the agency or let them, like we would take you guys to the claims org and everything else, for example, to see how claims handled things when we were at Farmers. But and that collaboration it can't all go through one agency marketing person,
right?
Or small group.
No, I think just the idea there, Mike, is to allow for access, and some agencies might not, want to take advantage of that. We do, we want to meet with people throughout the organization in all of the different areas, because again, you never know where an idea might come from. You never know where a creative stimulus might come from. But also, when you build a relationship, and I thought you were particularly adept at doing this.
I'm glad you're on this show, Tom.
But no, when you build a relationship across channels, and then you come out with a new advertising campaign, and you need the company to get on board. The work that you did originally when we launched a lot of the Farmers work to get the entire organization to buy into it is what helps to really put that brand building in hyperdrive. Because it's not happening just on television or just on the internet. It's happening when the phone rings, in the call center. it's happening everywhere. And, you're leveraging the strength of the whole organization to build your brand.
Let me put a little quick story in this. When we did we've seen a thing or two, we know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. We actually crowdsourced those from the claims and the agents.
Right.
Claims department and the agents, and we would get a couple hundred entries, and then we'd give any ones that cleared legal to the creative team, who then would run it like the NCAA basketball tournament, get the top like X amount and whittle them down to 4 that we were pretty sure were going to work and what was a 9-month process. But if your claim or if your story got picked, we flew you to a shoot. So all those ideas were crowdsourced at the time and brought a lot of whimsy and humor. And the creators were into it, man. They were into it.
Well, absolutely, Mike. That's a great example. And even though we kind of pushed them beyond maybe what the reality was of that exact claim, but it came from the essence of that claim, there was an authenticity to it. People could relate because, it wasn't all fabricated. There was an element of truth that came from it because it did happen. And
it had to, legal made sure it had to have happened. And the cause of the claim had to have been settled and all that other stuff, public service announcement, and why I almost always have lawyers in all my meetings. Okay, so that is really good on structure. I'm sure you've seen some bad structures. And also, when a CMO leaves, there's probably a whole bunch of angst that happens at the agency. How should a company handle a CMO leaving? And, how does the agency look at that?
You mean besides fear and trembling?
Yes, besides fear and trembling.
Besides that. Okay, well.
Scotch, yes.
Obviously, over the course of 40 years, I've had a lot of different CMOs come and go. Not every CMO that comes in. Matter of fact, we've had probably the majority of times when a new CMO has come in, we have not lost the business. We've been able to retain the business. Not always. There are times when a CMO comes in and that's the change they want to make. I think they're putting a bullseye on their back when they do that, because I think it was a recent podcast you had, it may have been with Jeff Siegerts again, about, when you fire the agency, you are saying that advertising was the problem.
Yeah.
So you better come up with something that's going to be better. And if advertising wasn't the problem, you're going to repeat. But when a new CMO comes in, we do everything we can from an onboarding standpoint to give that person incredible background in terms of the history of where the relationship was, where the advertising has been historically, why, and give kind of all the credentialization to it so that the CMO has an understanding about where this came from. The agency has a tremendous treasure chest of historical data on a company. So if you come in as a new CMO and you establish a relationship with your agency, they're going to know what has happened, what worked, what didn't work. They're going to know where some of the issues are within the organization. They can be a real ally to you. So from our standpoint, we're always sad to see the former CMO leave, but it doesn't mean that we're going to lose the business. If we have a good relationship within the organization, and sometimes that means it extends beyond just the marketing department, then we're on more solid ground. But I think that the worst mistake an incoming CMO could make would be to switch the agencies, at least right away.
Yes, I've never done that, because I do think it just highlights the fact that the advertising is going to solve whatever business problem is out there. And only if I really think that's the case would I do it.
Give him a chance. Maybe from a personality standpoint, you just don't jive and you just feel like you can't work together. If that's the case, you can always change agencies, but let both sides have a chance to see what can work, because it's probably going to be in your best interest to retain them.
So let's go. What's the best advice you've ever received from a client? We'll flip the tables a little bit.
Well, ironically, and you may go, wow, I was looking for something deeper and bigger. But probably the best advice I got, seriously, was when a client explained to me, hey, Tom, I've got a lot more jobs that I do besides approve the advertising. So if it takes a few extra days for us to get back to you with comments or whatever, we got a few other, like 20 other things that we're trying to manage at that time. And I heard that and I listened to that, and I came back and I brought that message back to the creative department and people kind of went, you're right. So because believe me, when you are on the agency side, when you're trying to hit a deadline, and you're waiting, and maybe the schedule called for the client to give you feedback in 4 days, and it's now been a week and 4 days, and you're like, what's going on? If you can get people to calm down and relax a little bit, and not be angry, then you move forward. And so ironically enough, that was some of the best advice I ever got from a client.
That's helpful. Thank you. So if you could tell all your clients one thing, just one thing to keep in mind, what would that be?
Wow. Well, can I tell 20 different clients 20 different things, but just one? But
no, just one. Good try,
Okay.
Tom.
I would
A true agency answer.
I would say that the creative process takes time, and give it time. If you want great work, give it time. Don't rush it. Don't get impatient. Give it time. There's a great story from one of a favorite books of mine called Orbiting the Giant Hairball, which should get you to want to read anything. And this is the story of a man who bought a dairy farm. He was a city slicker. He bought a dairy farm, and he came out. He wanted to look at his investment, and all the cows were out in the pasture eating. And he's furious. And he said to the farmer, who's the foreman, he said, "What's going on? These are dairy cows. I want them they should be milking." And he said, "Well, first they have to create milk, and it takes time. And what they're doing right now, grazing and eating, is going to make milk. So we have to give this process time so that you can get what you're after." And I laughed at that story. It's written by a former creative director from Hallmark Cards, because it's so true. Sometimes you can get great creative work by saying, "You know what? Show me what you got in a week." And sometimes that happens, but more often, give it time to marinate a little bit.
Okay, I'm going to hang on this, move on from the cow analogy, but I'm sure that's going to be a big hit. The cow analogy and the grass. So, funniest story you can share.
Well, boy, you really want to get me in trouble, don't you?
I do.
Is that part of it?
TK,
All right,
absolutely.
I'll tell you a funny story, and I'll try to do it quickly, which is challenging for me. And I'm going to go back in the time machine a little bit. So in 1988, Wayne Gretzky was traded from the Edmonton Oilers to the Los Angeles Kings, which, if your viewers don't know, those are both hockey clubs. And Wayne Gretzky at that time, and still to this day, was considered the greatest player to ever play hockey. Well, being in Los Angeles and being in marketing in Los Angeles, I knew that LA is a star town, and I just knew that Wayne Gretzky was going to make the Kings relevant, and that he was going to be, dynamic. Now, I grew up in Texas. I had never been to a hockey game, but from a marketing standpoint, I knew that he would be a big hit. So the news was announced on the evening news on, let's call it a Tuesday. At 8:00 on Wednesday morning, I called my sales rep at the California Sports Organization, and I said, "Hey, how can my client get involved with the Kings?" And he said, "Oh, well, gosh, a sponsorship program." And he started going 8:00 in the morning. He starts going through, what that was, and it'd be a dasher board, and he goes through all this stuff. I'm like, time out. What's a dasher board?
Yeah.
So he explains to me what a dasher board is, and ironically,
and a dasher board is the thing right around the arena that keeps the puck and the people in the arena.
Exactly.
So,
and it's like signage,
Yeah.
But when you looked at, and this part cracked me up, the Kings were getting about 4,000 to 5,000 people maybe at every game, and all of the dasher boards that they had sold were within the middle part of the arena. And so when I asked him, I said, "Well, he said, all right, here's the sponsorship, 2 dashboards." And he said, "Where do you want them?" And I said, "Well, I don't care about 5,000 people in the arena. I want to see the replays, that are going to be broadcast on sports every night." "Oh, well, let's put them behind the goal," which I was stunned to learn that the behind somebody else hadn't grabbed that up already. Right. So we've got the best location on the ice. We've got better. So I said, "All right, well, let me just call my client and get this approved." And by now it's 8:30 or 8:45. And he's like, "Tom, if you hang up, first off, the phones, you won't even be able to get back in. And if you do, this will be sold. I mean, now the phones are ringing off the hook." So I said, "All right, we'll take it." So he said, "All right, I'm going to shoot you a contract, da 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 da." So I agreed to this sponsorship without client approval. So my client was on vacation at the time. He came back about 3 days after this. And this was a client who I didn't realize that he was not a sports fan, but I was so excited to tell him, that we just landed this amazing sponsorship. And I said, Bill, Wayne Gretzky was traded to the Kings. We got the sponsorship of all sponsorships. And he goes, that's great. Let me think about it. I said, well, you own it. He's like, first off, who's Wayne Gretzky? And I was like, oh my God. And, Bill was classic at saying, if it works, great. If it doesn't, we'll talk. Well, Gretzky steps foot on the ice. The next day, it's on Today's Show. It's on Good Morning America. It's all over SportsCenter. It's on every news out. I mean, it's huge news, right? So he calls me and he says, hey, can you get us footage of that? Because, we've got a board meeting coming up, in 3 days. I'd love to show this at the board meeting. And I said, no problem. Absolutely. I said, but Bill, I just have one question. Do we have to talk? I mean, do we have to have a conversation? He's like, no, we're good. We're good.
Clever. Hey, TK, we're almost out of time. So any last practical advice for our listeners that we haven't talked about?
Boy. I mean, I think the one thing that I would really, from an advice standpoint, is to be brave, have courage, take risks, because today's business environment is so competitive, that if you're not doing something that's really going to stand out, something that's going to really connect to your audience, it's just all water, so have the courage to take risk. I mean, if you're only going to be in the job for 18 to 20 months anyway, you might as well swing for the fences every now and then, because that may be your best chance at staying relevant. But we love clients. Honestly, your agency is your biggest supporter. I mean, when we succeed, when you succeed. And just remember that, because we have a vested interest in you succeeding.
Well, thank you, TK, and thanks to all our listeners for tuning into CMO Confidential. Look for our other shows, which drop once a week and are available on Spotify, YouTube, and SoundCloud. They include Why the Short Shelf Life of CMOs, Parts 1 and upcoming the B2B edition, Is the CMO Species Headed for Extinction? And how venture capital really thinks about marketing. Hint, a lot of times venture capital doesn't think about marketing at all. Hey, all you marketers, stay safe out there. This is Mike Winton signing off from CMO Confidential, and thank you, TK.
Thank you, Mike.